Corporate fraud works best in the shadows, behind corporate walls. How does the government bring these wrongdoers to justice? Whistleblowers. These are the stories of those who risk their careers to shine a light on allegations of fraud. Today on Fraud in America.
All right, welcome to today's episode of Fraud in America. I am joined today by Daren Firestone, and we'll get into his bio as we get talking here a little bit. But I can tell you we've had multiple New York Times bestsellers. We've had well-known whistleblowers. We've had professional athletes even, but we've never had an acclaimed actor join us. So Daren, I'm glad you're joining us. We're going to talk today about crypto fraud, which is something that I know next to nothing about. I learned a little bit by going to your website at cryptowhistleBlower.com. But hopefully after talking today, I'll learn a little bit more about what spoofing is, zombie orders, moonwalkers. I mean, preparing for this was a walk down a lane I know nothing about. So I really appreciate you joining us today.
Absolutely. I'm happy to be here. I'm happy to get into the nitty gritty. I'm not sure I'm an acclaimed actor. Does acting in a Taco Bell commercial in 1996 count as acclaimed?
I think so. I absolutely. As a fan of the Bell, I've made many runs for the border, so I would have to say yes.
All right. Well, then I'll take it. So
let's dive into this. Yeah. So Daren, let's start with some of your backstory. It's fascinating. You're currently a partner at Levy, Firestone and Muse, a well-known DC firm. But your story starts in New York. Can you talk to us about your childhood, your acting career, and maybe how that has led you to the path of becoming an attorney? Your days in Taco Bell going forward.
Sure. Well, we got to go way back. I started acting. Gosh, when I was in fourth grade, I was in A Good Man, Charlie Brown. I played Snoopy. And because I lived in New York, I actually had a couple of agents who saw me in the play and said, hey, we'd like to represent you. And at the time, my parents, who both worked, said, no, that's not going to fly because we don't have time to take you to auditions. But I never lost the dream. And in ninth grade, I started going out on auditions because I could take the subway by myself. And I did a bunch of commercials. I played Woody Allen and Bette Midler's son in a movie called Scenes from a Mall, which is sort of my most high profile credit from that time. And then I took a hiatus for college. I came back to the theater after college for about 3 years, where I did a lot of off Broadway and off Broadway. And I did some more commercials. And then eventually decided, for a long list of reasons that I don't want to bore your audience with, that perhaps my skills were better used elsewhere. And I went to law school. I became a trial lawyer in the Department of Justice and was acting for juries, if you will.
That's it. So you went to Harvard for undergrad. Did you study theater at Harvard?
No, I studied political theory. So actually, the name of my major was something called social studies, which, believe it or not, many people who end up going to law school major in social studies at Harvard. And I did theater, I did school plays and things like that.
Okay. So you ultimately decided not to continue down the acting path and decided to go to law school. Why did you decide to make that pivot?
Well, I was in an acting class at the time in New York City, and the people in my class when I joined, I was the youngest at 23, and the oldest, I think, was 82. So I could see how people's careers progressed. And there were so many talented people in my class who were still struggling to find work. Acting can be a brutal business. And I just felt like at age 50, which I'm almost now, I didn't want to be in a place where I was still trying to make things work with a day job and things like that. Also, I had a little bit of success. I was in some plays where I would come home at night and my then girlfriend, now wife, would be asleep. I would be working on Fridays and Saturday nights. My friends would be away. And so I sort of felt like, well, I'm risking a lot to get success. And if success looks like this, there are some downsides to it. It's not all a dream. And so as the dream became a reality, I said, maybe I should think about other ways to spend my professional life. I still miss the stage. I do. I love performing. But I'm very happy with the decision.
So you ultimately decided to go to law school. I understand you went to Northwestern, and then you found your way to the Justice Department after a stint at the District Attorney's Office or U.S. District Court in Maryland. Tell us about your time at the Justice Department. What division were you in?
Yes, so I did. I clerked for a district court judge in Maryland for a year, and then I went to the honors program at the Justice Department in the tax division. So I was a tax prosecutor, criminal side, and that meant I prosecuted all sorts of tax fraud. And what's interesting, I think, about the tax division, at least on the criminal side, is people hear tax and they think all sorts of nitty gritty, arcane tax laws. But the reality is, if you are going to put somebody in prison for tax evasion, it's a lot. It's got to be more clear cut than the arcana, right? It's fraud, and it's about hiding your money or lying to the IRS, which fits in very well with what many of the members of TAF are concerned with, fighting fraud.
It's a willfulness standard, right? If I'm remembering. The tax law I found very taxing in law school. Am I remembering that correctly? It's a willfulness standard that you have to meet.
It is a willfulness standard. So you have to prove as a prosecutor beyond a reasonable doubt that the defendant knew that he or she was violating the law.
So after DOJ, why did you decide to leave DOJ? I know you joined one of my mentors, Bob Muse, in the private practice, but why did you decide to leave DOJ?
So I left DOJ, gosh, it was about 7 years after I joined. And at the time, my wife was pregnant with our second child, and I was facing a lot of travel because the tax division, unlike the U.S. Attorney's offices, is a traveling division. In other words, I had cases in Maryland, I had cases in Michigan, I had cases in Ohio, and if you have a trial, let's call it a 2-3 week trial in Ohio, you might be out there for 4 weeks beforehand prepping, plus the 3 weeks of the trial, and a whole lot of travel before that to interview witnesses, to put witnesses in the grand jury, to meet with people you need to meet with. So many people in the tax division, travel quite a bit. It's not uncommon to travel a good third of the year. And with a second baby on the way, and after 7 years under my belt, it was time. So I decided to move over to the private sector.
So can you talk a little bit about the practice? So you joined Stein Mitchell, if I remember right. The practice, why you decided to join Bob over at Stein Mitchell and some of the work that you guys worked on, both there and at your current firm?
Yeah. So I really wanted to be a whistleblower attorney. One of the things, actually, for those who know him, Jason Zuckerman played an enormous role in my career because I had a mutual friend with him, and I met with him once, and I said, hey, I really want to be a whistleblower attorney. And he gave me a bunch of names and said, you should contact these people at their firms and see if they're looking to hire. So he did. One of those people was my current partner, Josh Levy, who is, Bob, Josh, and I are partners together, along with a number of other partners at our current firm, Levy Firestone Muse. I sat down with Josh, we hit it off, and I said, this is what I want to do. When I went over Stein Mitchell, I did some whistleblower work and have continued that throughout my time in the private sector the last decade. But I've also gotten sort of blown aside into various other, very happily blown aside to a lot of other fantastic projects, mainly in the investigation space. But white collar, I've done some medical malpractice work, personal injury, all of them fantastically interesting. And so I've been blessed with a varied career since I left the government.
For the sake of full disclosure, I worked when I was in law school almost 20 years ago. I clerked at Stein Mitchell under Bob Muse, and he's the chairman of my personal board of directors. So just so everyone knows where the backstory is there. But I didn't overlap with Daren. So when I talked to Bob about Daren, the praise is very, very high for the work that you do, Daren. And one of the things that I guess you came on my radar screen not too long ago because you kept popping up in my LinkedIn profile with discussions about crypto fraud. And the more I followed your post on LinkedIn, the more I learned about this whole new area that really seems to be, sadly, a growth area. A lot of people are viewing this as an avenue to steal great sums of money. There's confusion over the SEC versus the CFTC over who exactly is able to regulate some of these things. So can you talk to us about what exactly is cryptocurrency? Maybe we should start there because I think a lot of people think they know about it. They've heard something about Bitcoin. What is cryptocurrency?
Yeah, so cryptocurrency, also called digital assets, is effectively a digital form of currency that exists on a blockchain, which of course leads to the question, what's a blockchain? So a blockchain at its most basic is a decentralized ledger. That means like a ledger, like say a spreadsheet, right? You need somewhere to keep track of who sent who money, or in this case, cryptocurrency. Now, in the typical case, in what we would call traditional finance or TradFi, it's a bank that keeps track of that ledger centrally. But with a blockchain, you keep track of the ledger through various different what we call nodes that basically verify that the ledger is correct. And the advantage of that is that you're not relying on one entity, the bank, which in some circumstances may not be either honest or solvent or competent. I mean, typically they are, but you have a risk when you have a centralized ledger. With a decentralized ledger, there's less risk in terms of one failure, right? They call it trustless. So cryptocurrency relies on a blockchain, which means that the amount of cryptocurrency that goes from one person to another is all recorded decentrally by these various nodes onto the permanent blockchain ledger, so that anybody can look and see, okay, this Bitcoin went from here to there. And if it sounds cryptic, yes, it is. But ultimately, what it comes down to is tracking ownership. And then you've got your different types of cryptocurrency, right? So you've got, people have heard about Bitcoin and Ethereum, and of course there are others, Litecoin, et cetera, and all of them have fundamentally both the same and different purposes that distinguish them. On the same level, it is a way of storing value, right? Much like a dollar or a yen or a euro, and the market ascribes a certain value to that cryptocurrency, and then sending it to somebody else. So I have one Bitcoin. It's worth right now a little bit less than $30,000. I could send it to you, and the blockchain would track that. We would be tracked as wallets, not as Daren and Jeb, but one wallet sending to another wallet. And all of this would be recorded on the immutable Bitcoin blockchain. That's a lot so far. So let me pause there.
Yeah. So when this first came on the radar, at least my radar screen, to me, it sounded like this is a great way for people to launder money. Like, maybe I'm cynical after all these years focusing on this area, but to me, it sounds like this is fabulous for people that are looking to hide assets from the government, maybe not to pay some taxes. Was that your original interest in this area?
That was my original reaction to this area was just like you, except
Yeah.
mine was sounds like a great way to commit tax fraud. And so to a large degree,
Yeah.
I ignored the area for a number of years. Perhaps I regret that, because if I had bought a bunch of Bitcoin back then, I would have a lot more money now. But that's okay. What eventually drew me back in was about 2.5 years ago. I had a friend who referred me a case, somebody actually outside the TAF community, because he knew I worked on whistleblower matters, and it was a cryptocurrency matter, and so I to me at the time it really didn't mean that much. I was like, okay, I've got a whistleblower. This is what we do. This is the situation we're in, as we typically are as whistleblower attorneys. And I was treating it like any other case. But at the same time, as with any other case, I really had to dig in and learn what are cryptocurrencies, how does the market work, what are some of the problems with it, and in learning about it, it really brought me to your conclusion, which is, oh my gosh, there's so much fraud here, particularly money laundering. And I looked around at the time and thought, are there a lot of whistleblower attorneys who are concentrating on this? And at least to me, it seemed at the time that there weren't. And so I really started to both dig in substantively, but also to start speaking about it and marketing and writing on LinkedIn and so forth, to try to position myself to tell the world, hey, I know about this stuff, and I can help whistleblowers in the crypto community take their information and expose fraud.
So, I've heard you talk about this subject matter before, and you talked about terms. That sometimes we hear in the SEC world, like pump and dump. It's not a basketball move, but it's something that we hear in SEC fraud world. But there's other things that we don't hear about so much in the rest of the financial fraud world, like zombie orders and things like that. Can you talk about some of the typical fraud schemes that you see in the crypto world?
Sure, I can. I will say that zombie orders is probably not one of the ones that is quite as typical, at least not in the enforcement actions. I can get back to that one and what that is, but I would I like to concentrate on what the enforcement agencies, particularly the SEC and the CFTC, and to some extent FinCEN, IRS, are focused on. And I would break it into the following categories: money laundering, and by that I really mean failure to have an anti-money laundering compliance program and know your customer programs. Two, market manipulation, and that umbrella includes pump and dump schemes, insider trading, wash trading, spoofing, zombie orders, etc. Um, Tax evasion, sanctions evasion. I gave myself a little cheat sheet in that. Oh, and then just sort of out and out, Ponzi schemes and other frauds. So those are the areas that I like to concentrate on.
Can you elaborate on some of those, like wash orders? What does that mean? And the pump and dump, our audience is kind of a mix of people. Can you talk a little bit more about what those are?
Absolutely. So let's start with pump and dump schemes, because pump and dumps are ubiquitous in the cryptocurrency world. I'm gonna give you a little stat here. So Chainalysis, which is one of the largest, I think it's the largest blockchain tracing company out there, and by blockchain tracing that means it helps its clients know where cryptocurrency is coming from, identify threats. It works a lot with the government to identify bad actors in the space. So big multi-billion-dollar company says in 24% of the tokens launched on Ethereum and Binance in 2022 were characteristics of pump and dumps, and that investors put $4.6 billion worth of crypto into those schemes. Another stat, researchers at the University College London concluded that $120 billion of volume, so that's not necessarily like, losses, but rather, money that's sort of churning through the system per year, was being sucked out by online crypto pump and dumps. So we're talking about billions of dollars that go into these pump and dump schemes. What are they? Well, if you have an idea for a company, maybe it's not, let's actually scratch that. You just want to create a scam. You want to make money in crypto. How do you do it? Well, so much of crypto is about speculation. It's just about, how do I find the newest token? I don't care what it does. I just care if the number goes up. And so you say, okay, well, I'm going to introduce the newest coin. It may do nothing. I don't know if you've ever heard of these meme coins, but these are coins that really do nothing, but are kind of jokey. Like there's a Pepe coin, like Pepe the Frog, which is really hot right now. People put their money into it. It appears purely speculative to me. And a pump and dump, and I'm not saying that Pepe is, I'm just saying that a pump and dump would be where you put your coin out there, let's call it Daren coin, and then you'd say to everybody, Daren coin is the hottest new thing. Everybody's going to be investing in Daren coin. And so you hope that real investors start putting their money in, the price goes up, and then Daren, who issued the coin, sells off all of his stake in Daren coin, goes home with all the profits, and then eventually the coin crashes, and everybody who's put their money in, except Daren and a few lucky people, loses money. This describes a significant portion of the crypto market, and it's a fraud. If you know what you're doing is sort of illegally, if you're telling lies, and if you are sort of manipulating the market with the intent of making it go up so that you can sell off your stake, that's illegal, and it can be pursued by the SEC, the CFTC, or even the DOJ if the conduct is egregious enough. So that's pump and dumps. Wash trading. Wash trading is also something that's quite common in the cryptocurrency space for a pretty sort of natural reason. There are a lot of exchanges out there. What's an exchange? An exchange is a place where you go to trade cryptocurrencies, right? I want to trade Ether for Bitcoin, or Bitcoin for Chainlink, or Chainlink for Dogecoin. You have to go to an exchange to do that typically. Have to is probably too strong a word, but most people do, whether it's a centralized or a decentralized exchange. There's so many of these out there. How do they attract attention? Why is anybody going to use your new exchange rather than the big names like Coinbase or Binance or Kraken? It's because there's going to be activity there. So you need people to be trading on your exchange in order to attract people to trade on your exchange. So it's a chicken and egg problem. How have a lot of exchanges solved this chicken and egg problem? By faking volume, meaning they pretend that entities that or people that don't know each other are actually trading on the exchange, but in fact, they've arranged it so that either they themselves or entities that they contract with are trading against each other through what are called wash trades or prearranged trades. In other words, they don't really care which side makes money or loses money because they're basically working together or they are the same entity. All they care is that the market sees that there's activity so that it increases the interest in using that exchange. And to connect it to pump and dumps, because there's often a connection, with a lot of these exchanges, they have what's called a native coin, right? So Daren Exchange may have the Daren coin that it is, supposedly it's the coin that you pay your fees to the exchange in. Maybe you get certain benefits if you do things in Daren coin. But what does everybody want? Everybody who holds Daren coin, particularly the people who created Daren Exchange, because they're usually going to hold a lot of those coins for themselves when they launch their project, they want the price to go up. So they fake the volume.
Yeah.
People, actual investors come because they see the faked volume. They start trading themselves. And the effect of that, the effect of the use of this exchange, pushes up the price of the native coin so that the person who holds it is going to be able to benefit. And a lot of those people then sort of surreptitiously sell it off so that they can make their profit.
This is fascinating. This is a real masterclass you're putting on, Daren. I hope people are taking notes. I remember I had an assistant years ago. This might have been 2014. Was telling me about Bitcoin. We had a case settle, and he said you should buy this, and he's explaining it to me. And I said, this sounds like a Ponzi scheme. He's like, no, I've done quite well. And he's now retired to the Cayman Islands because he listened to his own advice. I did not listen to is this a Ponzi scheme? Are digital assets Ponzi schemes? Or is there actually something there? You've looked into this world so closely. Is there actually something there for people to invest in?
Well, it depends who you ask. I think there are people out there who will say everything in this space, including Bitcoin, is a Ponzi scheme. And it's possible. It depends how you define Ponzi scheme, I suppose. But if Bitcoin were to go to zero tomorrow and a number of the people who held a lot of it were able to get out early, does that make it a Ponzi scheme? Maybe, probably not, in my opinion. There are people on the other end that say, you know, it's crazy. The SEC, the CFTC, they're taking advantage of this wonderful space where there are all these entrepreneurs who are trying to remake the world and you know, bring about peace, harmony, and lots of chocolate for all, you know, with their digital assets. I'm not in either camp, really. I'm a bit of a skeptic, and I admit my own limits to my ability to get my head around every piece of this market. So I don't really know where it's headed. Here's what I will say. There is a lot of fraud in the market. And so that's point number one. There are definitely Ponzi schemes. And here I mean the very traditional Ponzi schemes where somebody says, I've got this great. I'll give you an example. Actually, just I think last week, I have the date. No, it was last week. The CFTC brought a complaint on July 31st that was unsealed last week against a bunch of people who offered a bunch of products that they under the term funds, FUNDZ, and ultimately they said, give us your money, we're going to trade cryptocurrency, and we can get you 3% returns per week, and you can expect to make $1 million by the end of the year. And to gall you even more, they sold a lot of it as sort of like with like charitable language, that if you bring your charitable giving to us, we'll broaden it and we'll do good for the world. And according to the CFTC anyway, there was nothing. There were no trading. It was just all smoke and mirrors, right? And presumably, I don't know this for certain, but presumably new money was used to pay off old money, if they even did that at all. So that kind of a scheme is out there and is fairly prevalent in this world. Why? Because I think every time you introduce a new technology and there's a lot of hype and there are a lot of people who have fear of missing out, but not a lot of sophistication, they are easily tricked. And the digital asset space is exhibit A for that phenomenon, where people have made enormous fortunes and everybody knows it, and everybody wishes they had bought Bitcoin way back when and made one of those fortunes. And so now they're willing to believe it when somebody says that they can make 3% per week for them. And they get sucked into it. So those all exist. Now, the broader question of, is the entire space a Ponzi? I think that there are people who are legitimately working to create value in the space. I don't know if it'll work. I think you can have a real debate about, is there any future for privately held digital currency in a world dominated by government currencies? My personal take, probably not. I'm very skeptical that it'll work in the end, but that doesn't mean it's a Ponzi scheme. It just means that, people are taking a bet that this is the future.
Right.
And, they may be right. I may be wrong.
So you mentioned there's a lot of fraud, where money flows, fraud follows, and that's the important role that whistleblowers played in trying to highlight that fraud. Can you talk about, where these whistleblowers typically are in the crypto space, how they're able to identify the fraud for the government regulators at the CFTC, SEC, and the DOJ?
Yeah, as with any other whistleblower area, we want to find insiders first and foremost, right? So just people who are at the companies who know that the fraud is going on, who we can bring forward and can give very detailed information and provide emails and provide text messages or screenshots of disappearing messages. That's the ideal whistleblower. It's not the only potential whistleblower. So I have taken some clients who I would call sophisticated victims. Sometimes people are taken advantage of, and they begin to really understand why in a way that is not obvious to those who are outsiders, so that they can meet that test where they've provided information that is, not easily available to untrained eyes, but is otherwise in the public sphere. So I've taken a few of those clients that they really make a compelling case that they have done the work necessary to reveal a fraud that otherwise the SEC or CFTC or FinCEN wouldn't understand. And that can involve some pretty sophisticated analysis. Let's see. I've got a client who wasn't really a true insider, but sort of brushed up against one of these companies in a professional services capacity, and was sort of asked, well, can you provide this service? And that person got a peek behind the curtain, and what he saw completely horrified him. And then he found me and said, "Oh my gosh, I'm afraid this is a horrible fraud." So those are the type of whistleblowers that I've been seeing.
So we've mentioned some of the agencies involved here: the SEC, the CFTC, and DOJ. There seems to be a bit of a turf war playing out here. Have you seen that one agency is more receptive to particular cases? How do you decide where to first approach with these cases?
Yeah, I don't know if it's a turf war anymore. I think at a certain point it was. It's not clear to me that it still is, because there seems to be a fair amount of coordination these days. As an example, the Celsius case, Alex Mashinsky's Celsius case that came out in July, you had a simultaneous announcement of a CFTC, SEC, and DOJ action. So, it's not a coincidence that it all happens on the same day. That said, there is an open question of law as to whether certain cryptocurrencies are in fact securities or commodities. And, I try to hedge, frankly, just as a practice point. If there's any doubt, I try to file with more than one agency. And I will file with the SEC and the CFTC at the same time. Now, again, as a practice point, I try to find what I like to call a champion of the case at one of the agencies. So I will try to make contact with somebody at one of the agencies in an enforcement position who I can hopefully persuade to take on the case. Now, typically, I will only approach one agency first. And if I can find somebody who's interested, then I won't make that phone call to the other agency. At least not initially. There have in cases, circumstances have come up that made me say, you know what, I better make that other phone call now. But that's generally my strategy. In terms of which agency is better, I think you may recall that in Vegas, we had the heads of enforcement for both SEC and CFTC speak remotely. And when asked what their highest priorities were, enforcement priorities, both of them, uncoordinated, said the first thing they said was crypto. So I find that both agencies are quite receptive. There is a question about resources because both agencies are quite busy. There's been a lot of fraud, like I said, and a lot to do for both the SEC and the CFTC. So you want to come in with a strong case if you're going to get them to devote their limited resources.
That's such a great point. Whistleblowers supplement the limited resources of the government by helping to identify fraud and bring evidence that can hopefully move them forward. Undoubtedly, there's going to be somebody listening or watching today's show who is working at one of these exchanges or one of these companies, and they have identified fraud. What do you say to that person?
Call me. But besides that, look, it's tough to be a whistleblower. It's a tough decision to come forward, and there's all kinds of reasons to do it. The best reason is to end a fraud. And yes, there are financial reasons as well. But there is a compelling reason to make sure that in the end, investors are not going to be left holding the bag, and that you don't have people losing their life savings, or as we've seen, has been documented, for example, with the fall of Terra, suicides. We want to stop that sort of thing from happening, and whistleblowers are really vital to make sure that it happens, because if they don't step forward, the government may just not have the evidence to move forward with a case. The other thing I would say, because I've come across this before with some of my clients, they're often surprised by what the government doesn't know. There is an assumption, I think, that the government knows all, follows all the facts are clear to them, and what more can they add? And the reality is the government does not know all, not because they don't have the competence to pursue this sort of thing. To the contrary, I think that the government attorneys who I've worked with are extremely impressive people and extremely competent, but they can't know all things at once. They're human, and they don't have huge teams. And so they really do, as you say, Jeb, rely on whistleblowers to come forward to supplement their capacity and to expose the fraud that they just, they don't know about because they're paying attention to this fraud over there. They don't know about this one over here. And if you're a whistleblower and you have that information, they're going to be quite appreciative when you come.
On an earlier show, we had Sarah McLean. She's head of DOJ's cybersecurity task force, and she said, Jeb, when I look at these complex matters involving, in her situation, cybersecurity and technology, she goes, at the end of the day, it really is fraud that my grandmother understands. When you look at stuff, even in, I would assume this is true for your world too, it's, there's more bells and whistles or technological jelly on the biscuit, but at the end of the day, it really is just fraud. Is that what you're seeing on your end too?
Yes, it is. It is. I think that this is not uncommon in the technology space, that fraudsters wow people with big words and complex, statements and things like that. I actually get excited when I see that. I'll give you an example.
Yeah.
AI, right? AI is very complex. I think we're going to see a lot of fraud because of the hype, in the same way I was talking about cryptocurrency before. But in addition to that, there are AI plus crypto companies out there, right? And a number of them came up really soon after the introduction of ChatGPT-3, which was sort of late last year, early this year. And although I don't know this for sure, I would say a lot of them are pump and dump schemes or otherwise frauds. And I would encourage anyone listening to go Google crypto AI companies, and you can get a list of some of the top ones, and go to some of their websites. And for some of them, when you read what it says on the website or in their what they call white papers, which are sort of the description of their project, see if you can understand it. See if it makes sense at all. Because when I read some of them, it doesn't make sense at all. And I spend a lot of time thinking about these things. So maybe I'm missing something, but I think I'm a decently sophisticated reader and observer. And if I can't understand what it is you do as a company, I am very concerned that you don't do anything except try to pull the wool over somebody else's eyes in order to make money. So, again, I wouldn't mention any particular names here, but I do think that when I see that phenomenon in the cryptocurrency space, it is exactly that, what you called, jelly over what is just sort of garden variety fraudulent biscuit.
Amen. Well, Daren, I appreciate you deciphering some of this for us today. I'm sure that we're going to be having future episodes on this topic. Certainly, we're going to have future webinars and conferences and things like that, just trying to understand what is going on in this world. And we certainly appreciate you joining us today.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here. I'm happy to get out the good word on crypto and fraud. And I really appreciate your having me as a guest.
Well, until next episode of Fraud in America, if you believe you have witnessed fraud against the government or fraud on the financial markets, we encourage you to visit our website at taf.org, where you will find a directory of member attorneys who represent whistleblowers across the country. On our website, you will also find additional information about our nation's various whistleblower laws and programs and a way to donate to our organization as we step forward in spreading information about whistleblower programs. This episode was edited and produced by Rachel Brooks, and our theme song is by Connor Chaos. A big thank you to our TAF staff and researchers of James King, Emma Bass, Jackie DeMar, Kate Scanlon, Max Boldman. Fraud in America is a project of Taxpayers Against Fraud Education Fund. The opinions expressed on today's show belong solely to the guest and are not necessarily endorsed by the organization. Thank you for joining us on today's episode of Fraud in America.